Welcome to 6 African Trade Talks, the show that brings you closer to the intra-Africa trade business world. I'm your host, Chad Chawanda. In this episode, our guest is Edward Galante. Edward Ted is the co-founder and executive director of Mangwana Capital. Edward, welcome to 6 African Trade Talks. How are you?
Chad, thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure. Before we start our show, we'd like to hear a word from our sponsors.
Would you travel to Cape Town for business or leisure? What if you could combine the two? Well, you can. With Optimum African Experience, Cape Town Leisure Experience, with partners such as University of Cape Town, CEDA, Kadena, Luminary, and Prime Focus. Experience the best of Africa.
Ted, can you tell us a brief background about who Ted is?
Sure. Ted is originally from the United States of America. I hold an American passport. I'm very, very pleased to share with you that I'm also recently the holder of a Zimbabwean passport. So I'm a dual citizen of America and Zimbabwe. I moved to Zimbabwe from San Francisco, where I was born 30 years ago. So I've been in Zimbabwe for 30 years, working and raising a family here. I love the country. I'm 65 years old. I'm married with 2 children, and very happily living in what I consider to be one of the most beautiful places in the world, Zimbabwe. That's who I am.
Amazing. Looking forward to hear a lot about that. Tell us a little bit more about your career journey.
Well, I started many years ago in San Francisco in the securities business, and I had a multiplicity of different jobs. I worked for the Pacific Coast Options Exchange. I worked in corporate finance and institutional trading and syndicate for a firm called E.F. Hutton and Company, which has long since been acquired by Shearson and then Lehman and then American Express in the securities business. I then went over to work for an institutional investment manager in the institutional business. And then I broke off and started my own business, developing commercial real estate and small businesses in Central California, where I met and married my first wife, who was originally from Zimbabwe. And through that association came to the country first in 1983. I was married here in 85, and shortly thereafter, we moved to Zimbabwe in November of 92. I moved over here to start real estate development, and I started my life and my career in Zimbabwe as a developer. We built and financed, more importantly, quite a lot of high-density housing here in Zimbabwe. We built and developed a number of the high-density and medium-density suburbs in Zimbabwe. So that was where I got my start. And I originally bought a farm here in Zim. So I've been in agriculture, I've been in construction, mortgage finance, structured finance, and have bought a number of manufacturing and other operating businesses. I'm an investor in a number of different businesses. But recently, 4 or 5 years ago, my partners and I started Mangwana Capital, which is definitely the most exciting thing we've done today. Mangwana Capital is an investment advisory business. And shortly after forming it, we realized that we weren't going to add any value just as advisors. We needed a balance sheet. So we started a business called Mangwana Opportunities, or the Mangwana Opportunities Fund, which is a private equity fund backed by now, I think it's just over 40 Zimbabwean pension funds, contractual savers, insurance companies, and so forth. We invest in the primary sectors of the country. So it's been a great journey. I'm very happy to tell you a little bit more about that journey and what we've done. But that's basically me and my career path today.
What an interesting journey. I'm from Zimbabwe myself, as you know, and learning to know that you came in at the beginning of Zimbabwe as a country after independence, and you've gone through different phases of the Zimbabwean economy, as it is known, a challenging one. So very interesting to learn more. Give us an insight into Mangwana Capital. What does Mangwana Capital do?
Just to touch on what you said, it hasn't been all smooth sailing in Zimbabwe. We had some pretty tough years here, but just to make a point about that, I mean, Zimbabwe's got great natural resources, but the biggest resources it's got are its people. You know, I travel around Africa a lot, and I come into contact with a lot of different African countries and leaders and business people and so forth. And one of the things that convinced us to start Mangwana Opportunities here was the quality and the caliber of the people that we're dealing with. So what we do at Opportunities is basically we invest in three sectors of the economy, or we're targeting three sectors of the economy for private equity: agriculture, natural resources, including mining and now recently oil and gas, and I'm happy to talk about that. And we're looking at the tourism sector. We have not yet made an investment in tourism, although we have a deal in our pipeline, which we're very excited about for next year, which I won't be talking about because we're under a confidentiality agreement. We've made 7 investments to date, 4 in agriculture and 3 in resources. We farm on the various corporate farms. We farm pecan nuts, we farm lucerne and cattle, blueberries, citrus, avocados, flowers, and stevia. And then there are some additional row crops for shorter term cash flow, but we basically focus on export generating crops or dollar substitution crops in Zimbabwe. We've also recently and very proudly taken a position in a longstanding business in Zimbabwe called Twine and Cordage, which makes, amongst other things, baling twine for the tobacco industry and shade cloth and shade netting for the agricultural and horticultural industries. So that's on the ag side. On the mining side, we're invested in Vigilant Energy, which is a gold miner and processor in Kwekwe. We're invested in a very exciting business called Associated African Nickel, which is an early stage exploration business and has a number of very exciting prospects here. And we were one of the earliest investors in a business called Invictus Energy, which is drilling for gas as we speak in the Mzarabani Basin. And we are very hopeful, and the signs are certainly promising, that they will have quite a large gas find, which would not only be great for us as a fund, but would more importantly be fantastic for the country as an energy source. So those are our businesses today, Chad, and that's what we're focused on. We're looking at a number of other horticultural, agricultural businesses and a number of other resource businesses. And we're looking to expand our activities into neighboring countries, into Botswana and Namibia, Zambia, and possibly Mozambique.
Really interesting project that you have gotten onto in just 5 years. So that reflects on the opportunities in Zimbabwe. So thank you very much for sharing. What has been the impact of technology for a company like Mangwana through your investments?
I mean, what we're seeing, particularly in the agricultural space, we're seeing real improvements in on-the-ground technologies, everything from soil monitoring and water monitoring to fertigation systems to drone monitoring of crops and satellite technology to measure yields and measure fertilizer level and moisture levels. I think the advent of big computing is going to make a big change to our business. All of our exporters are looking at the blockchain in terms of tracking produce from farm to fork. We think that's going to be a big value added, and we'd like to be out in front of that curve with our farms. The other thing I think that is worth mentioning is that we're looking at regenerative agriculture. We're very, very focused on establishing a baseline and increasing the soil quality and the environmental biodiversity on the farms in which we operate. It's not only the right thing to do in terms of ESG, but it's really good business because the better quality soils you have and the more fertile your soils, the better yields you're going to get. So we're very, very focused on that. And I think technology plays a big role in that baseline establishment and then the continuing monitoring and ranking of where we are.
Thank you for sharing. Before we continue, we'd like to hear a word from our sponsors.
Would you travel to Cape Town for business or leisure? What if you could combine the two? Well, you can. With Optimum African Experience, Cape Town Leisure Experience, with partners such as University of Cape Town, CEDA, Kadena, Luminary, and Prime Focus. Experience the best of Africa.
So Ted, you spoke about Zimbabwe's people being one of the greatest assets the country has. Let's look at culture. What major role do you think culture is playing in the work that your company is trying to achieve and in the future across Africa, based on your travel experience as well?
Well, I think the culture here, specifically in Zimbabwe, is one of hard work, integrity, and honesty. That's the sort of general culture of where we are. I mean, we're very blessed in this country. Contrary to some of the news reports people see, we have a very peaceful country where people are sort of getting on with it. I think what's been an enjoyable journey and what we continue to do is this whole journey of financial inclusion. And it sort of speaks to the culture question. There were certainly no other homegrown private equity businesses here. There were a number of DFI-backed, foreign-backed private equity businesses looking to come in, make investments, and take advantage of the opportunities here, but none that were sort of benefiting the millions of pensioners in Zimbabwe. And so from a cultural standpoint, I think it's been really important for us to have established Mangwana Opportunities. We now have well in excess of 1 million pensioners who we represent in terms of the investors of our business. We feel that responsibility deeply. I think that you will know, due to hyperinflation over the past several decades, there's been a wipeout of some of the pension fund assets. So the opportunity to really deliver back to the people who have put in so much hard work to the country is really a great opportunity. And I think the culture here is receptive to that. Certainly from a business standpoint, political standpoint, we find that we've been banging on an open door. Government has been very supportive of what we've done. They've given us tax-free status, and they've given us prescribed asset status, which allows the insurance companies and pension funds to invest on a basis which allows them to meet a certain prescribed allocation. So that's been very helpful. And I think culturally, we're very comfortable where we are. Just to take that slightly further, I think we've been doing some work in Botswana and in Namibia, particularly. And we see a lot of similarities across those two countries. And we see local pension funds that haven't had much of an opportunity to participate in their development of their own economies. And we see similar sort of very stable, very peaceful populations that are very interested in getting ahead and joining and being part of the narrative going forward on the global stage. And so we're very excited about working with our partners and our financial partners in those countries to expand the footprint of what we've done here. I hope that answers your question. I think it does.
Certainly does. And thank you for sharing. 1 million pensioners is not a joke. That's close to 10% of Zimbabwe's population. So what an achievement. Congratulations. As a traveler and businessman, what business opportunities have you seen on the continent that you could share with an international investor or African diaspora looking to come home? You are in your second home as we speak.
Chad, the problem that any investor will have when they come down here is learning how to say no, because this place is so full of tremendous opportunities. I alluded briefly to the resources. I've got some thunder going in the background. So there's one of the resources, the rainfall. There are so many opportunities. I think just to narrow them down, we're particularly focused in the agriculture and agricultural value added space. I think there's a huge opportunity, particularly given the global situation with the war in Ukraine, to address some of the issues there. We have a water shortage in many developed and agriculturally developed countries. Zimbabwe and the region has enormous water resources, which are largely untapped. I understand that climate change is coming, and it's certainly a concern, but I know for a fact that His Excellency President Mnangagwa is focused on harnessing water resources in the country and turning dryland farming into irrigated farming. And we've been in discussions with the government about the opportunities that arise there. So there are huge opportunities. The mineral sector, specifically in terms of green metals, nickel, lithium, those sorts of metals, I think is an untapped area. And of course, the value addition to that. It's one thing to dig it out of the ground. It's quite another thing to process locally and move. We have a huge power deficit in the region, not only in Zimbabwe. So we've been approached by a multilateral to set up an alternative energy fund as well. And we've reached out to some of our investors here, and they're very, very interested. In fact, have given us letters of commitment to come in and back an alternative energy fund, which will see us supplanting the existing grid here. We have a huge power deficit. We need something like 2,500 megawatts, and I think we have shaky capacity of less than half of that. So there's big upside in the energy side. I was privileged to attend a sort of a Shark Tank event as a judge a few days ago, and the quality of entrepreneurs at all levels for fast-moving consumer goods, for technology, for reforestation, for all sorts of diverse businesses that I witnessed at this little one-day event was just inspiring. The opportunity for delivering credit in this part of the world. I'm invested in a micro-lending business, which is growing rapidly here And there are a whole bunch of reasons for that. But I think that the financial institutions that do operate here, and I'm involved on the board of one of the financial institutions, tend to be more slow moving than some of the more nimble micro lenders and financial institutions. We've been involved with a blockchain business that's very interested in delivering financial solutions. I can go on for hours about the opportunities. The biggest challenge is focusing on what you want to do here, because one can easily get distracted by everything. But I would encourage the diaspora, if they're thinking of coming back, this is a great place to come back to and a great place to invest in.
Certainly. As you were speaking, what just came out in my head is that one of our greatest challenges are also our greatest opportunities. So one would look at Zimbabwe and say, there's no electricity, there's no this, there's no that, but that's all opportunities. So definitely depends how you look at it. I believe the opportunity is just the way you do.
It's interesting, if I could just come in there. I mean, we were chatting with some guys this morning, and we were at an investment conference in Dubai a couple of weeks ago, the AIM conference, I think it was 2 or 3 weeks ago. And one of the days was devoted, believe it or not, to the blockchain, which you would have thought was dead because of the collapse in FTX and Bitcoin price and so forth. And there are a number of businesses there that are busy turning surplus energy from renewable sources that can't be deployed at a certain time into Bitcoin or into computing power. I mean, the opportunities are extraordinary, and they're mobile. You can pick them up and move them around. If you're powering your center pivot irrigations or your fertigation plant on your farm, and then you don't need the power, you can immediately switch over and start Bitcoin mining or processing data on a mobile basis. I mean, the opportunities just seem to be expanding in this part of the world. You're right. The challenges here present nothing but opportunities. I think it's how you view them that counts. That the problem is not getting distracted. There's so much to do. I'm 65, not 35. Chad, can't you give me 30 more years?
You know, I wish I could share because, I love the energy that you share. So definitely, if I could share these years, it would be amazing.
Thank you.
How do you see Mangwana Capital and the projects you're doing contributing to the transformation of Africa under the Africa Continental Free Trade Area?
It's really interesting. I think there's a number of areas, particularly in the agriculture and energy spaces. We think that we fit right in with things like the Comprehensive African Agricultural Development Program, which helps African countries eliminate hunger and reduce poverty. I think if you take something like our pecan farming operations, so we farm pecans down in Matabele land. Now, Matabele land traditionally, this by way of example, has been an area where it's been what they call a zone 4 or region 5, where the conventional wisdom says very little grows. Well, that's not true for pecan trees. It's ideally suited for things like pecan trees. So we established our initial plantation of 300 hectares just outside of Bulawayo. And then one of the communities, a very, very poor community in Kezi, came to us and said, look, we have an irrigation scheme. It hasn't been maintained. Can you help us resurrect this? What can we do together? And we've put together a very innovative project where we've planted 150 hectares of pecan trees on land owned by the community. We've resurrected the irrigation system. We've resurrected 2 defunct center pivots. We're paying the community rental in wheat and maize. We've resurrected all their small scale plots and are assisting them with the farming and fertigation of those plots. And we're employing the community in the maintenance of the pecan orchards. And after the pecans reach commercial viability, the community then has the opportunity to either take payment in a portion of the revenues generated from the trees or continue with the food that it's getting. Meanwhile, we're doing all the technology and skills transfer to people on the ground. So it's a real win-win situation. I think that together with things like dedicated outgrower schemes on the agricultural side are giving people, real hope and real livelihoods. And as a consequence of that, we've had a number of other irrigation schemes in Matabele land come to us and say, look, please, can you replicate what you've done here? Because it's worked so well. And the community's delighted with it. And I can send you a link to a video which talks about it. But we're very proud of that project. And we think those sorts of things will really contribute to agricultural growth. In the energy sector, we're working on upstream projects with Invictus Energy for a gas to power plant, amongst other things. And as you know, fertilizer, the main component of fertilizer is electricity. And so we're looking at a gas to power to plant, gas to fuel. There's a number of different areas where we think we can add back to the grid, and then distributing alternative energy through our farms and our other businesses. Again, I can go on and on about the tie-ins with the agenda, but they're sort of parallel our agendas as investors who are investing in developing the economies.
Yeah, interesting. Looking forward to seeing a better Africa with all this work that you're doing and, the initiative of the Africa Continental Free Trade Area and what we can all contribute to make that a success. Any podcasts or books you'd like to recommend to our listeners?
Well, Chad, there's only one podcast I can recommend, and I'm on it now. So what can I say?
Thank you. No, thank you very much.
My reading is mostly business oriented and is mostly web based, but when I do read for pleasure, I read philosophy. So that's probably not going to help your listeners much. I listen to something called the Daily Stoic, and I listen to podcasts on exercise and health and longevity. But nothing much related to this subject. I try and leave the office a little bit at home when I leave.
Would you travel to Cape Town for business or leisure? What if you could combine the two? Well, you can. With Optimum African Experience, Cape Town Leisure Experience, with partners such as University of Cape Town, CEDA, Kadena, Luminary, and Prime Focus, experience the best of Africa.
Africa is a continent full of potential, but potential means nothing if we don't take action to create value. Let us take action. Thank you for listening to this episode. Don't forget to post and share this episode on your social media platforms. It will help us reach our mission of sharing knowledge about intra-Africa trade and making it available to as many people as possible. Let us grow our continent. We can go far, fast, together. If you can please leave a review on our podcast page or on Apple Podcasts.